G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic week, and g'day from Colorado Springs. I travelled down yesterday from Jackson Hole, that is why we missed today, but of course we are going to catch up on the 24 hours that we missed as well as the updates into today. Of course, I'll show you the maps, we'll be comparing maps, and I'll show you geolocations as there is a number of significant changes being made on the maps. Speaking of the maps, we're going to look at maybe some speculation about will Russia somewhat shake up their tactics? Is the 50-day ultimatum going to influence any of that? And we're going to give you a reality situational update on the front line, and I'm going to push back on this idea. There's this idea floating around that this is, quote, Russia's last-ditch effort. There's going to be a decisive attack, all of that. I'm going to push back on that because, as I've been stating for years, it's not really how attritional warfare works. We're going to look at how you win attritional wars, somehow the just complete misunderstanding of attritional war, although it's very simple. We're going to push back on some pseudo environments that have been set as well. So a lot in that. And where we're going to start is where we knew there was going to be a lot of problems, because when you think Europe, you should think red tape, bureaucracy. And we know the US, well, they want a win-win. They want to export stuff and they want a lot of money to come in. They don't care where those weapons go. Europe, they want to boost up their own industrial manufacturing sector. It's going to take a lot of time. So there's already problems in Trump's proposal about getting Europe to buy weapons for Ukraine. So let's have a look at this, and we'll start here. As President Donald Trump hardens his position towards Moscow and seeks new ways to bring its war in Ukraine to an end, he says he isn't looking to deliver Kiev long-range missiles that could strike targets deeper into Russia, saying no, we're not looking to do that. And in the last video where I spoke to you guys, there was some speculation about Tomahawk missiles or this or that, and what we said every time is, how long is that going to take and how many are you going to get? Because again and again and again, it doesn't matter the system that goes to Ukraine or is promised to Ukraine, because it comes years late when it is just ineffective on the front line at that point and not in enough quantities. And this is what people have left out of all of this, is huge aid packages coming, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, how long does it take to train someone to be competent on that system? And how much of that system are you actually going to receive? Are you going to receive enough missiles to actually make an effect on Russian strategic aircraft? Or is it going to be enough for headlines? But there's some more political issues in this too. So Italy will not join the US-led initiative to procure weapons for Ukraine due to a lack of funds. As well, France will not participate in Trump's proposed scheme. They want to build up their own defense industry by prioritizing local procurement. Again, building a manufacturing base, since it's been hollowed out over a number of decades, takes decades in itself, if it is actually possible at all. But there are countries who are on board with this. Germany, they are on board for purchasing and donating Patriot systems, as well as maybe other systems, not Taurus. Sweden, who has a massive domestic military industry as well, they have said that they've welcomed the new scheme, although they're subject to detailed clarification about what exactly is happening in this. Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Canada, they're all somewhat on board, but we don't know to what degree yet and how much money really. We saw the $60 billion made negligible effect realistically on the front line. It didn't stabilize the front line, let alone get it to a point where it's going to be going in the other direction. Yes, $10 billion is an extreme amount of money, but in a war like this, if we weren't talking in like the hundreds of billions of dollars, I don't think that we're going to see the border move in a favorable way for Ukraine, let alone potentially stabilization, let alone the issues that come with manpower. You can donate all the money you want in the world. The number one issue here is manpower. And let's continue on France. Paris will not join the initiative to buy US weapons for that reason. Of course, wanting localized then procurement. But given Europe's limited manufacturing capacity, Germany believes buying American weapons is the only way to swiftly supply Ukraine with the weapons it needs. Yes, if France is over here wanting to procure local weapons, build factories, all of this, good luck. That takes many, many years. But again, we hear a lot about defensive systems, Patriot systems, other bits and pieces for drones, but all that's being spoken about is strategic defense, and defensive systems do not win wars. Lack of can lose wars. But again, nothing in this is actually taking into account and addressing manpower issues at the front line. It's not addressing the battlefield. It's not addressing thousands of Garand drones. It's not addressing thousands of FABs. Nothing in this is actually relevant to the frontline battlefield where territory, towns, everything is being seized and held and taken, which is first and foremost, this war is a land war. And I think this sums up so much of what we are seeing. We want to give Ukraine weapons, we have to pay for it. Well, we need to replenish, we don't have the money for this. And this idea that this is existential, and I do not care how many European leaders say that this war is existential, well, they are not acting like it at all. So let's have a look at the maps. And we do have 2 days or 2.5 days to catch up on. So of course, here's Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Now, what I'm going to do is we're going to just step back yesterday to the 15th. We'll turn this on so you can see any of the red check. The red check is where Russia has made ground in that 24-hour period, at least according to the deep state Ukrainian Ministry of Defense intertwined map. Okay, so expect some lag. But firstly, up in the north, we do see some ground being made on this crossing around Milove, where Russia opened up a new axis in Kharkiv. Is this just to tie up resources? That's what I believe. Is it a new axis? Well, others believe that. I think it's just to tie up Ukrainian resources up in another sector. It makes sense given the ability if you are a numerically larger force. Let's continue our way down, and then we come to Pokrovsk. Now, we are going to be speaking a lot about Pokrovsk, and will Russia shake up their tactics a bit here? And we can see ground being made to the south and southwest of Udashne. We'll confirm that on another map in a second. We come to Velika Novosilka. Now, we can see around Fedorovkia, Russia has made some ground, as well as to the southwest of Tolstoy. Now, let's measure this from here to here. We're talking about 4 kilometers. 4 kilometers is a lot, okay? It is a hell of a lot in a war like this, and we continually see updates of that amount day after day. Currently, we have done for weeks, and remember, we need to actually have some relevance to this. And well, if we look at and compare, the Ukrainian 23 counteroffensive made at best 8 to 10 kilometers and is still seen by many as a success. Okay, let's step up to today and look over the map update. So we see that it is confirming Russia has made some ground to the west of Vovchansk. We haven't seen that move in some time. Continue our way down, and we see just a little bit of ground being made around Pishyane in Pokrovsk sector, as well as in the Velika Novosilka area, Shevchenko, Zelny Pole, and Myrne as well. So lots of little movements over the last few days, but I believe there's been significantly more than this, and that's why we're going to use other maps from more neutral sources. So let's just look at Pokrovsk itself. And when we say Pokrovsk actual, we're talking about the western side of it, around Udashne area. Now, let's open up then AMK Mapping's map. And it's not the easiest to see, but you can see, and we can confirm this movement just to the west of Udashne, and just some movement down Novosibirsk in here as well. Remember, he is showing that Novomayalivka, these areas to the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, is coming under control. Again, we've seen geo confirmations that tend to show this, but we can confirm that movement right in there. Now, what we are now going to do is step onto the eastern flank of Pokrovsk, where Russia is putting a lot of resources. But again, this is one of those areas we keep saying that there are axes that will be exploited into large kilometer squares. And this is like we're seeing around Velika Novosilka, where we see multiple axes now meeting, and those kilometer squares, especially once this actually fills in the grey zone in here, will turn into large monthly gain. But let's focus on this, because the Pokrovsk and Toretsk, Konstantinivka, is coming to an end and coming to a fold in of itself. So let's have a look here. We have a few different updates on a few different regions. So this is all on this flank, but on the eastern side. So you can see Yamblanivkia, some ground being made in through this area, as well into Poltavka and Rusan Yar too. So this is Rusan Yar, and this is just to the south Popov Yar, Poltavka front. AMK saying there is advancements in this direction. Let's have a look on the Suryak maps update, and he's speaking more about on the western side out of Razine here. So let's have a look. This is Razine right in here, and he's showing movement further to the west into Suvorov as well. So we can see the movement being made and continuing to push on the eastern flank of Pokrovsk. Remember, in a second, we're going to speak about why this may be important, why this may be a shake-up in Russia's tactics. Let's have a look on this. Again, this is AMK mapping's map. Now, he is showing different again. So see where this grey zone is coming down here? Well, we know there's definitely some level of presence, so we can confirm that there's at least soldiers working in there. But he's saying this area through here, up to Fedorivkia, through this Novotoretsky, even all the way up to this Mayak, is coming under Russian control. And again, what this is doing, let's just presume that this is what has occurred. So let's just say it is the grey zone in here. We're drawing in basically the grey zone. Let's assume that this is under Russian control in here. What this is doing is it's building, it's not just building the eastern flank of Pokrovsk, it's actually building the northern flank. So let's say the Russians are out to here. If we were to just draw a straight line right down here, they are realistically right on the northern flank and building that envelopment around. And will we see that holding of the envelopment or actually push for a physical envelopment? So we can see more and more pushing there, and the battle for Pokrovsk, yes, the whole battle sequence has been taking place over months and months as far as artillery and fires and all of this, but the actual battle, like internally, is getting started very, very soon. Now, just to the south of where we were looking, let's have a look at Mykolaievkia here. Now, off Creamy Caprice, he shows these geolocations in then Mykolaievkia itself, and I'll just show you one of those. You can see a couple of Russian forces down in here. It's shown in grey. Many are saying it is now red after those attacks. So this is building on here, but also different axes are now building on each other. So this we used to call the Pokrovsk eastern flank, but it's become the Toretsk western flank. So let's talk about Toretsk down in here. Now, if we have a look on AMK, he's showing this. Now, he will call it Konstantinivkia direction, which is correct. But he's showing, see this reservoir in here, through across to Petrivkia? He's showing this filling in. Now, this is red, in my opinion. We have seen Russian forces and geolocations right where my cursor is in here. So, highly likely leveraging off that reservoir, and that this is as per AMK's showing it. But we can see how this is building on that Pokrovsk flank, what is becoming both a threat for Pokrovsk and now Konstantinivkia up in here. Now, I believe we have a second update in this direction. Yes, we do, but to the east of here, we're talking this Alexandro Shultny as well, the Dalivkia front. And we can see he's showing in this direction, so it's up this train line. You can see where this dog legs out to the northwest, that he's saying right up into here is where the Russian forces have made some amount of ground. Now, let's move up into the north. Of course, we've seen some minor changes in here, but let's come up into Sumy, and we'll open up then the Suryak maps, as he has an update here around Yanakivkia that he says that Russian army controls about 70% of this. Now, there's a lot of people saying that Ukraine has had large advancements back in here. Again, we're not seeing this shown on their own map with all the incentive in the world to show this. Now, let's move our way down to where I see being a very, very relevant front line, of course, in here around then the Terny front. So we have Karpivkia, but we also have the Oskil River, which can work as a natural then border, and you can create a large kill box in here. And as I've been saying over a number of months, Russia has been doing exactly as we have said in here. So you just get to a point, you hold that, you expand on that to desaturate the enemy's drones and fires coming in, and you create a kill zone as the expansion of control here around Kharkiv. Now, let's move down into Velika Novosilka, and that will then finish up our maps for the day. So we see this grey zone in here. Realistically, I believe all this is most likely red. Now, let's open this up. We'll have a look at Suryak. Now, Suryak is showing that all of this is getting filled in here, as well as on the direction out from Shevchenko as well. So we can see where Malivka is, that Shevchenko is pushing in the north here, as well as the other areas are filling right down, building to the border of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast in this direction. And again, I think we'll see that catch up in a bit. But both Suryak and Deep State are actually behind in a couple of geolocations on this front. So we have from a military summary, we have just in here, in this Novokatsk as well. If we come in this video, and I believe what time frame did he say? At 1:25, so we have multiple updates in here. We've come forward to then 1:25, and we see flags going up. It looks like that guy has on a thermal coat as well, and we have multiple geolocations in here confirming advancement into this direction beyond where these maps are currently showing. So keep an eye on this movement on these fronts, and again, the Velika front is going to have effect down into the south, as well as leverage into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast on this another envelopment that is getting created. Now, let's talk about the reality, the situation on the battlefield, and where I see things as going to continue moving in the same trajectory that we have seen. But we're going to have a little bit of speculation about this too. So this gentleman here, he's a communications specialist and a soldier in the armed forces of Ukraine. We are approaching a moment when we will very likely have to face another major crisis on the front. While the words powerful play their games of 2 weeks and 50 days, trying in every way to demonstrate resolve where there is none, we will have to withstand the desperate pressure from the Russians on the front and in the rear. Where we are now, the Russians believe that if they press now with all their might, they will finally be able to break us. And as we have said, it seems as if the Russians can smell blood in the water. This is based, among other things, on a long, exhausting war, the escalation of regular shelling on both military targets, military-industrial complex, and the terrorising of civilians in the rear, undermining economic potential, disrupting mobilisation through subversive activities, propaganda, and now airstrikes. What I will say is mobilisation and the disruption of that has been done far more successfully by Ukrainian politics and people than not wanting to sign up due to propaganda, the internal propaganda, than anything else. Aggressive information on semantic warfare, often successful efforts to undermine Ukraine's support from foreign players, while having the backing of China, North Korea, and foreign companies. Not the complete backing of China at all. That love money and sell anything that helps them fight against us, as well as some of Ukraine's Western neighbours who are our open enemies. So saying, again, as we've heard more and more, countries like Slovakia and Hungary are enemies of the state. The Muscovites believe that the cumulative effect of 3.5 years is about to yield results. 60 days or by the end of the year. The exact timeline is not so critical. It will vary depending on how much the words spoken in the West are backed by actions, whether we will finally correct some of our mistakes, etc. And there, again, it seems like, and again, it is looking like the cumulative effect of 3.5 years is actually about to start yielding results. And we may see this, whether it's a day or a week or a year or 2 years, eventually attritional war falls off a cliff, as per what we call it, the bankruptcy theory. The main point is this: they hope that their final and decisive push will now bring the desired effect, that by burying the infantry of another dozen motorised rifle regiments in the Donetsk Oblast, they will collapse our front. I see posts where people write that they won't succeed. Well, I hope so too, but there is a question regarding the criteria. How do we assess this now? And how will we assess it if the enemy encircles Pokrovsk? They have thrown insane forces at this task, and Ukraine is throwing an insane amount of forces to try and hold that area too. And what we're going to go over is Pokrovsk. There's going to be a lot of leverage if the situation really deteriorates in this, as well as will Russia keep on the flanks in a trit, or may they actually try and encircle it? No matter what news is this summer, we need to focus on the main thing. It's banal but correct. be in the army or for the army. Those who can kill occupiers, kill occupiers. Those who can help do it more effectively, put effort in that direction. So again, not turning a blind eye towards the actual battlefield and focusing on these strategic level assets, only focusing on that and only focusing on other political victories rather than the actual task at hand, which is the battlefield. Stop turning a blind eye to problems. Give authority and initiative to people who are competent and not always convenient. After everything we've been through, it would be very bad to focus on secondary matters at this critical moment. And that is my biggest criticism. There's been so much focus on secondary matters rather than the actual matters that would influence the front line. As far as only focusing on long-range assets, only focusing on that, and only focusing on a village being recovered in Sumy, meanwhile, 5 or 10 villages more fall in the east and the south. So let's talk about Pokrovsk in this. And about a year ago, I reported a conversation with an analyst who works behind the scenes, and that he said the biggest danger to Ukraine and Russia in an attritional war like this is that they make a mistake, and in this mistake, they lose a huge amount of soldiers, whether by POW or by killed in action, in one foul swoop. That they get enveloped somewhere, they get stuck, and you lose a huge amount in one area all at once. That if you had a Mariupol scenario again now, that would have so much larger effect than it did at the time. Now, typically what Russia has been doing again and again with success is they build and support the flanks of an area. They create a kill box. They've done this from Avdiivka to Bakhmut to Velika Novosilka, to name the area, from Uldar, which we don't even speak about anymore. And they attrit down in the city, and they maintain fire controls of the roads in and out. So as you either put in forces or pull out forces, you're attriting that as well. You create a kill box, because the Russians' main effort is not territory. The Russians' main effort is attrition. Look through that lens at this war and you will see why a lot of decisions which may not make sense start making sense, and they've held then the artillery advantage from barrel, glide and drone in the center of the city, in that kill box. Then that's the triple choke method we hear about, or we call it the paint by numbers. Now, what some are suggesting is that will Russia go on a different way here? So typically what we'd see is the red arrows around Pokrovsk. They hold the flanks, they attrit in the center with the triple choke, and they attrit on the supply chains in and out on Radinsky and through then this east to west network of roads as well. But some are suggesting, well, may they actually go for an encirclement, aka the white arrows in here, for either to capture or kill a large amount of troops at once. Not only that though, but a huge amount of leverage too. So we're going to start with the speculation that they actually push for an encirclement that'll give fallout within the Ukrainian armed forces, but a huge amount of leverage in Washington too. That if you have an area where there are thousands of troops realistically, actually physically encircled, Putin's going to have a lot of leverage in this. Now, what do I think of that? I think it is something we can speculate about, but I actually don't think that Putin really gives two shits about Trump's ultimatums of 50 days. There's been ultimatums come and go. How much effect has that had on Putin and his troops? Nothing, really. That he will want to continue the war on the same trajectory of what it is and not risk a shake-up. Because if you try and do this and get cut off, next thing you're the one that's getting cut off and your troops are out of the island boys of the Kremlin. Because what is being done by the Russian command is proven to work, and Ukraine has showed that they don't have an ability to counter this, build on the flanks and attrit down. So why would they change now? This second option of then encircling and having leverage is assuming that Putin is threatened by that 50-day ultimatum. I think we'll see the war not change pace in any way, and that includes on decisive last-ditch effort attacks. Now, I want to have a look at this, because the reason I had a look at this written up by this soldier was actually off Tatarigami UA. And this is something we've spoken about a lot. of how people online can influence then the front line, and how some of this, I believe, people have blood on their hands. Now, David D, who's infamous for big arrows on maps, not much else, he is former 96 Bravo, so intelligence analyst was within the US forces, which may concern me, but he says this about this. If you interviewed nearly any infantryman on the front line in any major war, you'll get the same thing. Stop being a doomer, saying that an infantry soldier only sees what is in front of them. They have a very small view of the front line. Although that may have been true back in the day, but now with the internet and guys like this online with tens of thousands of followers, and they can see everything from Telegram and Twitter and talking to people as well, it's not really relevant anymore. But let's see what Tatarigami Ue says back to David here. This is simply a translation of a frontline soldier's analysis. Nothing more, nothing less. It's honestly appalling that someone who consistently fabricates claims about Ukrainian offensives and manpower and has been wrong on nearly every major point of the war feels entitled to lecture a frontline soldier about his perspective. We see this again and again, that if a frontline soldier who's actually fighting has a different perspective from NAFO, then that soldier has no idea what they're on about. My team and I agree with the soldier's assessment because we actually have access to far more data than you, beyond just reading Telegram channels and interpreting secondhand information. If I were you, I'd sit this one out. You have no data, no knowledge on resource and unit disposition from both sides. And throughout the war, you have relied on fabrications and speculations rather than facts. You have one of the worst track records, and you're in no position to lecture me on anything. And Ice Andale says this: David, you're a blogger. I know you like Ukraine, but you have zero acumen when it comes to strategic thinking or know the fallout from lack of it. When Ukrainians on the front in 22 were screaming for leadership whilst being wiped out, you were the one shouting winning when they weren't. The result of that was devastating. You silenced their calls and the rest of the NAFO idiots. And this is exactly what myself and Mr. Tatarigami Ue talked about in our interview, was that these people with such large online followings that they can silence the calls of actual soldiers on the front line. So actual guys like this who are saying, these are the problems, this is the situation we are facing. They're in the fire line, they're talking to other soldiers, they have information available that may not be available to us, but because it doesn't fit a narrative, it is being silenced and pushed to the bottom. And this is why I've said many people that should know better, who maybe do know better, but are appealing to an audience, I believe legitimately have blood on their hands. Now let's talk about the front line continued and this decisive last-ditch effort attack. Now Sean Pinner, who I've interviewed on this channel, he says this. Now CNN, and I've seen others, report Russia is preparing a last-ditch offensive. 150,000 troops ready to move before Trump's 50-day clock runs out. A Kremlin Hail Mary. Now, Sean then replies and says, I must add, I have friends on the front and no one person has said to me this is the case. So I'm waiting out. And I'm not talking about Sean, I'm talking about just the information in this. But how many times has the media and bloggers said to us, Russia's last-ditch effort, their last missiles, their last attack, their last men, their last conscription, or that there's 80,000 troops in Kursk, or there's 100,000 in Sumy or Donetsk, or anywhere ready to go. All that this is doing is it's setting a pseudo environment. It's creating an environment of which within that it is true, but using or leaving out some critical aspects. So the environment that gets set, and again and again and again, is that we don't see an attack from an attack that was never coming, and when it never comes, then it's a win. The best example of this was that Ukraine had to enter Kursk because there was 80,000 Russian soldiers ready to cross into Sumy and keep going through. When this came up was when Kursk started to fail on day one, actually, from the ISR. But when we really saw that Kursk was starting to fail, then this came up when questions were being asked about, hey, what is the benefit of this? Well, there was 80,000 troops ready to go, although it took Russia weeks and weeks to bring in any forces in there. So, but that's the pseudo environment that was set up. An attack that you said was coming, that was never coming. When it never comes, then you can sell that as a win. But this is what we'll speak about in a sec, that propaganda needs to support the battlefield. The battlefield can't be just supported by propaganda. And 150,000 troops, people saying, oh, it's a Hail Mary in response to what Trump has said. this is just not the fact. 150,000 troops takes months and months and months to train, arm, and move into location. When Trump makes a statement, Russia can't just move 150,000 troops onto a front line. And if Russia can do that, well, that is way worse than the false narrative pseudo-environment of these troops coming into play. Again, this last-ditch decisive level attack, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit within the attritional nature of war, which is what Russia for the last 3 years has been focusing on. And that is excluding the first opening months of the war. But since that point, it's followed a very paint-by-numbers, tick-off boxes of attritional nature of warfare. I'm going to show you and back up exactly what I'm saying here from this. Military operations in attritional conflict are very distinct from those in a war of manoeuvre. Instead of a decisive battle achieved through rapid manoeuvre, attritional war focuses on destroying enemy forces and their ability to regenerate combat power. The goal of attritional war is to eliminate potential while preserving your own. And what did I say about Kursk? I said the best way for Russia to counter Kursk is to push in the east. Exactly what happened. What would be the best way for Russia to counter Patriot batteries and all these systems coming in? Keep pushing on the front line, because we know Ukraine has a manpower issue and we know people are getting ripped away from air defense and ripped off the street to move on to the front line. That's how you counter it. In this context, a successful strategy accepts the war will last at least 2 years, and it's broken into 2 phases. The first phase is basically what we saw, which is rapid maneuver war. But of course, we saw that fail. After then, we've seen that then come to a close really in the first few months. We then saw an acceptance of attritional nature of war, and then you have to then have a massive mobilization, and industrial output needs to increase massively. But in that, you're going to see very little positional shifting on the ground. So 23 and then the beginning of 24, while the dominant form of combat is fires, so artillery and fabs and missiles and etc., rather than maneuver, complemented by extensive fortifications, Surovikin line, and camouflage of those areas. The peacetime army starts the war and conducts holding operations, providing time to mobilize resources and train the new army. So the army that begun the war, they don't end the war. The army that begins the war, they then conduct holding operations and stabilizing operations, and then new soldiers need to come into the fold. Let's continue. Only after meeting these criteria should offensive operations commence. So you have dominant fires on the battlefield, and you have extensive fortifications, and you've mobilized enough resources. We've seen that's why through the late 22 Kharkiv, Kherson through to 24, that was when that then phase 1 was, and then the beginning of phase 2 started in 24 on the resumption of offensive operations. They should be launched across a broad front, seeking to overwhelm the enemy at multiple points with shallow attacks, exactly what we've seen. The intent is to remain inside a laid bubble of friendly protective systems, from drones to artillery to electronic warfare, while stretching depleted enemy reserves until the front collapses. And this is still going on at the moment. Only then should the offensive extend toward objectives deeper in the enemy rear. Now, this is something that we may or may not see. We don't know how warfare like this looks. If there is a breakthrough on the front line, can they extend deeper into the rear due to the nature of drone warfare and the relatively few numbers that can have a catastrophic effect? So that's the part that we don't know. But we are seeing areas. If 2 years ago we saw 4 kilometres day after day after day, we'd be calling that a collapse, with many areas coming under control. Concentration of forces on one main effort should be avoided, as this gives an indication of the offensive's location, and opportunity for the enemy to concentrate their reserves against this key point. So if you push on one area, if Russia was just pushing in Velika or just pushing in Sumy, Ukraine will just move everything there. What you want to do is stretch that front line. And I don't believe that Russia have territorial ambition in Sumy or Kharkiv. But what this does, well, it takes troops let's go here to here, some 360 kilometres away from the front, and days away that you keep pushing there and there, and you're just plugging many different holes, and you then get overextended. The attritional strategy is centered on defense. This is counterintuitive to most Western military officers. Western military thought views the offensives as the only means of achieving the decisive strategic goal of forcing the enemy to come to the negotiating table on unfavorable terms. So they are wanting this peace through strength, whatever crap you want to say. Their goal is to force the enemy, Putin in this case, to force the enemy to come to the negotiating table on unfavorable terms. The strategic patience required to set the conditions for an offensive runs against their combat experience acquired in overseas counterinsurgency operations. That this is going to take years and years, and that you're going to be coming on a favourable term in this, that there's a decisive victory in this. And the reason we see then analysts, commanders, everyone saying decisive, because they are putting their experience onto Russia, going that, well, they're going to have a last-ditch decisive effort, when realistically, no, they're just going to keep grinding like this. And it is the event horizon that's being crossed, but very, very slowly, rather than all at once of a decisive attack. The military conduct of war is driven by overall political strategic objectives. Again, war is politics by other means. The military realities and economic limitations. Combat operations are shallow and focus on destroying enemy resources, potential, not on gaining terrain. And this is the lens you need to look through this at. Yes, Russia is gaining terrain, but in my opinion, their number one objective is attrition, and they want to destroy. Russia's number one objective is to destroy Ukrainian potential economically, potential to join NATO, potential to fight on the front line, and then maybe territorial ambition, where Ukraine's objective is territorial and then political NATO. And this is the thing, is this is where there's somewhat two different wars being fought on this, and that's why Ukraine doesn't want to give up any of these areas. Propaganda is used to support military operations, not the other way around. A military operation cannot be propaganda in itself. This is the problem when you're relying on external support exclusively, is optics matter so much, and that you have operations like Kursk which make no strategic sense, but optically you need that win. Unfortunately, many in the West have a very cavalier attitude that future conflicts will be short and decisive. That this is not true. They thought that any major power would back down in the case of initial military defeat is wishful thinking at best. And how much of Russian history in war has had catastrophic initial defeats and then been able to bounce back? And this war is no different. And to the point now that NATO, which was saying Russia has nothing left, that's collapsing 3 years ago, is now saying that Russia is a threat to Munich. Any conflict between great powers would be viewed by adversary elites as existential and pursued with the full resources available to the state. So Russia does see this now as existential. Ukraine, of course, well, it's a bit of a paradox in Ukraine, the existential crisis of this, because it is existential, but still won't then conscript 18 to 25. Europe is not acting as if this is existential, which to me, they are accepting that no, Munich and Warsaw is not actually on the cards for Russia. The resulting war will become attritional and will favour the state which has the economy, the doctrine and military structure that is better suited towards this form of conflict. So the attritional nature of war will favour the state whose economy, their doctrine and military structure, as far as having the best low-end military and ability to spool up reserves quickly and equipment that is simple enough that lower trained soldiers can actually take it on, is we better suited towards them. If the West is serious about possible great power conflict, it needs to take a hard look at its industrial capacity, manufacturing, mobilisation doctrine, and means of waging protracted war, rather than conducting war games covering a single month of conflict and hoping that the war will end afterwards. As the Iraq War taught us, hope is not a method. And I like that end bit, that hope is not a method. At the end of the day, it comes by political objectives, military realities, economic limitations, and at the end of the day, protracted attritional war is a fight of mass, a fight of money, a fight of men, a fight of manufacturing. And this will come very slowly. We'll start to see it move, and then it will move faster and faster. And this is why the constant linear ideas of war are extra chromosomal at best. And why we need to take into account that what we've seen previously is not going to be what we see in the future, and why you cannot not focus on the very front line. Strategic strikes are important. I'm not saying that, but they will not win wars. If strategic strikes won wars, why did the US put a single boot on the ground in Iraq? Why did Russia not win in the initial opening weeks or months when they had massive overmatch in strikes? And they still have a massive overmatch. Look at the Iskanders landing anywhere they want, okay? It will make the war more costly, but will it change the tide? To change the tide, you need mass mobilization, mass in general to stabilize and push back, rather than this falling back and getting stuck in all of these envelopments that are just attritional caverns at this point. And when people say this is showing that Russia's getting attrited, when you have this getting developed, where you are surrounded on multiple sides, when the other side has overmatch on items, it doesn't mean that the attritional rate is whatever, but it does show the nature of this war. And Russia's doctrine, back to Soviet doctrine, it focused on that way of fighting, on having low-end formations that could become mid-end because they've already had some low-end. They have far more simple equipment, but far more of it. You look at that from a T-34 compared to a German tank, but it's 10 to 1 and it's more simple. It means people can be trained on it much faster. And this is even why you get over a protracted war in the Soviet military, you end up with a pseudo NCO corps, but you don't start with one. And you'll actually over time fight better and better, where the other enemies will start, your enemy will start strong and actually get worse and worse as the NCO corps gets attrited, because you're not going to be able to replace that as quickly. And this is what I've said time and time again. Is the Ukrainian force more offensively capable now than it was in 2023? No, in my opinion. Is the Russian military more capable offensively now than it was in 2022? Yes. And that is just different doctrines about starting with highly professional soldiers and focusing on individual professionality rather than low-end formations and simplicity. That it will have much higher losses, but it can sustain much higher losses as well. We got off in the weeds there somewhere, but legends, you have a fantastic day. I'm going to go drive my rental car up Pikes Peak. That'll be fucking amazing. Have a great day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.